Hi, we're Option Conservation, and this is the Shoe Room Sessions.
Someone once said to me, I had a similar thing, and someone said, it's all right, Rich, swearing works in your accent. And I was like,
yeah. Interesting.
yeah, is that a compliment? No, I don't think that's a compliment, is it? No. Dad, do you even think the concept of the environment sector exists?
No.
Excellent.
So
Discuss.
Wow, that's a big one to hit me straight with.
Because I'm not sure it does either, and I keep grabbing at it in the environment sector, the natural capital sector, and it doesn't feel quite right. So, what's your take on that?
So my take on that, I'm glad you asked the question because I've heard you refer frequently to the environment sector.
Yeah.
People do, and I
usually when I'm slating it. In fairness,
so the environment sector, insofar as I would be able to define it, it comprises in the current context. Some really well qualified, highly skilled professional people who care passionately about about nature, but are employed by some really well-established environmental NGOs, household
RSPB,
brands,
Woodland Trust, Wildlife Trust,
and some well-established public bodies, Natural England Environment Agency. That is the sector as I think we refer to it today.
Yeah.
Is that a sector in the same vein as you would look up a portfolio of opportunities for particular industries to invest in? The environment sector won't come up in that portfolio. My contention is that the environment sector could become that kind of significant, but to get there, we're going to have to significantly innovate and disrupt the existing models of delivery, and that's fundamentally the opportunity that I think I see for the likes of your organisation. What I'm at is incentivizing change in the private sector so that the private sector itself can become part of that environment sector. So, my vision is to grow a real sector in environmental restoration. And there's a whole range of skills, new technologies, business models that will need to come to the fore to enable that sector to truly be worthy of its name as a sector.
That is fascinating. So you'd like to build it and help, or be part of the process that you're a very humble chap. So you'd be part of the process that builds it and produces it. Whereas I'd quite like to end it. So I'd quite like the terminology not to be required anymore. So, for example, it's a bit like I wrote a piece recently about how I don't think the fact that the moniker ESG is falling away is at all a problem because we don't need it anymore. You don't need built for digital systems anymore because it just is. You don't need online optimized or mobile because it just is. So that's why I'm happy. I think labels and language can be real Trojan horses or help us access concepts. But once they're embedded, they're just gone. So whereas you want to build that environment sector, I want the environment sector as a terminology not to matter anymore because natural capital is an asset class and it just seamlessly weaves its way into finance. Same outcome, different.
I think we're saying the same thing.
I completely agree.
I think there is nonetheless a new class of skills and technologies and attributes that we need to be growing to scale environmental restoration. I'm talking about the investment we need to make in new approaches to scaling our monitoring, reporting, verification, how we develop projects, how we use new digital technologies to understand better how we can baseline and model environmental delivery. Those are skills that can be embedded across a whole range of different organisations in the public, private and voluntary sectors. So, I think we are saying essentially the same thing.
I love it. It's probably a useful opportunity for you to tell people who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a career environmentalist. I have worked through the voluntary, public and private sectors to deliver my why as I see it, which is to make a difference in enabling a fair and efficient transition to a nature positive and net zero economy. I want to play my part in that transition. In my day job, I'm currently managing director of EnTrade, which is a market mechanism. We can talk some more about what it does, but it's been spun out of a water utility, recently established as a company in its own right, in joint venture between Arup and YTL UK.
So let's figure out how on earth you got there and where you found your why. So take us back to where you grew up, and don't skimp on the detail. People love the story, so take us from the start and bring us through to today.
Yeah, so I mean, in common with many of your guests, I've listened to your podcast series with great interest, and the common theme as we open that early chapter in our career stories tends to be early experiences in early childhood with nature and the natural environment, and that is part of my why. I grew up in South Wales, moved around the country a fair bit, but one of my earliest memories is experiencing a very harsh winter, and in the back garden where we lived, in the nestled at the foot of a mountain, the Brecon Beacons, seeing great spotted woodpeckers, nuthatches coming to the bird table at the age of 5, and that just blew me away. There was something about seeing these quite exotic looking birds coming so close to the lounge window that just captured my imagination. So that led in, as we moved around the country.
What did you folks do?
My folks. So my father is a civil engineer, career civil engineer, which back in the day took him from place to place. So we moved with him, as tended to be the norm back in that generation.
Yeah.
Lived couple of years in Sutton Coldfield, where I sustained that interest in birds and nature through experiences in Sutton Park, but then happily moved back to a rural environment in North Wiltshire, and that's where my formative kind of childhood years was experienced. I had my schooling there at a state school.
Did you enjoy school?
I wouldn't say I enjoyed school per se. I stuck at it and had a reasonable set of GCSEs coming away from it.
Yeah.
I was quite a shy, quite a nervous boy, and actually that's part of the story. I think for me the need to get into the natural environment and experience nature was a desire for inner peace, mindfulness, that experiencing the solace, I guess, and tranquility that comes with time in natural landscapes. You asked me about my family. The nature thing came from nowhere. That was about me and my my desire for time out and about, and I guess my connection to landscapes and places. But the political interest came from my family. We were a fairly traditional, I guess, liberal middle-class family that spent time around the dinner table talking about politics. Both my parents were reasonably politically active and aware, and that, I guess, instilled in me an interest in current affairs and politics. And it was the bringing together of my interests and passions for the environment with my political passion that has really grounded my why, and as I've discovered a direction in my career, how I've gone about developing my career.
When I hear about conversations like that, or people who had really dynamic, challenging early conversations, or their parents that were in businesses and things like that, I'm just so envious. I'm like, oh, I would have learned so much at an early stage, and I've had to play catch up since then. So it sounds like a vibrant debate at the dinner table.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. I was politically active as a young man, and
what does that mean in reality?
Well, I was a member of a political party when I was 16, briefly actually, because part of my story is I'm not somebody who. I'm passionate about making a difference and seeing politics improve people's lives and improve our environment. Party politics and the tribalism that comes with party politics doesn't really motivate me. So it was a very brief thing for me in my early adulthood. But using politics as a medium to debate and make better decisions is what motivates me. And the bringing together of my environmental interest and my political interest was about essentially using politics to progress and promote environment as a way of improving the quality of our lives, and trying to instill that as a more mainstream way of thinking in political discourse. Now, that's still a work in progress, of course, and part of my story is it took me until my mid-20s to even think about bringing those two sides of my brain together.
So did you go to university?
Yeah, so I went on to university. So the sort of the early, just to conclude on the sort of early stages of my early adulthood, lots of cycling, and I became very passionate and quite nerdy actually about birds in particular. So I fell into that kind of, it's not unusual for men of my generation who have developed an interest in nature to go particularly hard on birds and bird watching.
Do you have a theory as to why?
Well, I think for me it was actually. I mean, maybe I'm on the spectrum somewhere. I think a number of people probably that tends to be the norm in the birding community. But I think it was about me needing to find a space where I could find myself, I think, to a degree, and it took me to places that that got me off the beaten track and experienced other parts of the world as a result of the interest. So I think it was about me exploring my place in the world, actually, and giving me a comfortable place to retreat into, where there was a community, where there was a common kind of language, and it was giving me something to be really focused and expert in. Interestingly, I mean, it came to a natural conclusion. It was short-lived in my case. I spent a bit of time travelling when I graduated, and I graduated with a degree in politics from the University of Sheffield. I didn't have any clear sense of direction as to what I wanted to do with my life. I had an opportunity to begin some work with an overseas natural history tour company. I'd done some recceing of Eastern Europe. And this was the stage at which the Iron Curtain had just sort of fallen, and still felt quite edgy to be sort of, as a young man, sort of 17, 18, 19, out recceing places like Romania and Czechoslovakia as was. And then that took me into a period of my life where I was working in the Indian subcontinent, and I spent a bit of time working, setting up a tented camp in eastern Nepal, and recceing places and leading overseas tours to show people, British people predominantly, or Western people, these places, and show their wildlife. But that slowly drifted into a connection back to my interest in improving the environment and in nature conservation. So as I started to travel, I realised that my interest in wildlife could get me those kinds of gigs. I went out to Northwest Frontier Province in Pakistan with BirdLife International, spent a winter out there surveying a very remote part of Northwest Frontier Province, which would be probably post 2001 would be a place that I would not go near, actually, as a British citizen, a white British citizen. And then wound up in Fair Isle, a little island between Shetland and Orkney, where I was an assistant warden on Fair Isle Bird Observatory. And at that point, I'd kind of got to the kind of zenith of my birding career as such, and I got it out of my system. That's a place where, you know, you're kind of your traditional bird nerds have always seen as a kind of bit of a mecca. And 9 months on a very isolated island in Shetland kind of got it out of my system and led me to.
So how old are you at this point?
So I'm 25 at this point, and I was increasingly anxious about my lack of clear direction. And so I started looking for more conventional contracts with conservation organisations at the RSPB. Initially, I spent 6 months working in Northern Ireland, studying curlews and just classic kind of research project. I spent a summer on the Hebrides. I mean, these, in many ways, I look back and think, well, you know, they were the best jobs I ever had. You know, I mean, the RSPB, they gave me a license to go and catch corncrakes, a car, the equipment to go and take sound recordings and measure them, and you know, go away and catch as many corncrakes as you can. Go away and find as many curlew nests as you can. I mean, it was a sort of an extension, I think, of my sort of the early stages of my passion in just going out there and finding and hunting and gathering, I guess, in terms of the birding thing. And then that took me into a more conventional policy environment, where it was at that point, I suppose, I was drifting into a traditional conservation career through the back door. Nothing wrong with that,
but genuinely by following your passion. By
following my passion, and I think the thing that there were a couple of things that were eating away at me at this point in my life. I was kind of conscious that without an ecology or scientific background, I was taking quite a risk by going into kind of frontline nature conservation. And secondly, it didn't feel like necessarily the best use of my skills, and the political interest was still there at the back of my in my conscience, the back of my mind. And I think the crossroads in my career and the point at which I finally realised I could bring these two sides of my brain together was the opportunity to go and do a year's work-based master's degree in sustainable development with an organisation, a charity that had just been created, Forum for the Future, which had been created by Jonathan Porritt and Sarah Parkin, who was the leader of the Green Party in the late 80s. Sarah's brainchild was the Forum for the Future scholarship programme. I was the second cohort through the programme, and the idea was it was taking aspiring young leaders through a very fast-track, intense process of development by giving them placements in different sectors of society. And it was accredited with a master's from Middlesex University.
So was that a process you had to apply to?
It was we were very, very lucky. I mean, it was it was a competitive process, but there was a bursary attached to it, and Forum had raised money, and I mean, they ran the programme for many years. And
what do you think they saw in you to give you a place on that?
The passion for the natural environment was probably something that stood out, and the desire to make a change and to see the world through a system lens, I think, was part of what they were picking up on. At the time, I was living in Scotland, and they were looking for people from across the UK. So I'm sure that probably gave me an edge because I wasn't bringing anything particularly diverse to the mix of people they were selecting from. But there's a whole cohort of people out there like me, alumni of this experience, who I think would say they could point back to that as being a formative foundation stone for them in their careers, and I'm certainly amongst that cohort. So that was the point at which I started to realise, okay, I could actually bring my politics together with my environmental interest. It led me actually, ironically, straight back to the RSPB, but employed as a parliamentary officer to represent the RSPB in Parliament and advocate to politicians.
So help us timestamp this. When would this have been, and who were the government at the time?
So this was the late 90s, early 2000s.
So first chapter
New
of
Labour.
Blair. Yeah.
Blair had been elected on a landslide. Labour had very little interest in the environment, and one of the things that interested me was how, with a very urban, cosmopolitan, modern, reformed Labour Party,
the Cool Britannia movement,
very focused on absolutely culture, public service reform, constitutional reform, you could possibly make the environment relevant in all of that.
I just finished reading Jeremy Haywood's autobiography that his wife wrote with him as he was passing away, the former cabinet secretary, and hearing him revisit that reform agenda from his diaries was fascinating. So it feels like that time wasn't too far ago.
No, indeed. Very different challenges today, with a Labour government now struggling with an economy on the slide and public services on the slide, of course. Back then, it was different, and it was very hard to make the environment a mainstream political consideration.
Who was the Environment Secretary, do you remember?
So Margaret Beckett was. So I was at the RSPB when DEFRA was created, which was a fascinating point in that political era. A lot of optimism, actually. I mean, you may or may not recall the old MAF, but
before my time,
it was very much a creature of the old post-war agricultural policy.
Ministry of Food and Fisheries.
Absolutely. And Nick Brown, as was the agricultural minister back in the day, very much a trades union man. So at the time, NFU had the ministry by the short and curlies. It was representing the industry's interests inside the cabinet table. One of the challenges, I think, with trades unions is the tendency to default to a very sort of lowest common denominator view of the world. And I think the NFU in particular has a real challenge with hundreds of members to provide that kind of leadership role, and I think we're still seeing that to a degree playing out today. back in 2001, massive opportunity. There was a sense of, I guess, optimism post the foot and mouth outbreak, that there was a better way of incentivizing farmers to deliver other outcomes alongside food production. That was the sort of very early stages. And
Because I think people often forget that the very early murmurings of BNG was a Labour idea,
yeah,
and
indeed.
originally put forward. And,
Indeed.
yeah.
Yeah, so the creation of DEFRA, I think, was something that I was certainly part of, and making that case post the foot and mouth outbreak.
That was the thing that scared me the most in my time in the EEA, the prospect. So I finished PhD 2008, just around the financial crisis, so started in the public sector 9, 10, something like that. It still left scars, the experience of, and it was really interesting reading Jeremy Hayward's book about what it felt like from a civil service side of, no operational structures to actually make things happen on the ground from a central perspective. But I was never concerned about floods or wildfires, and this is me viewing it through my leadership lens. How would I lead 400 or 500 people with managing this situation? A foot and mouth style setup was the one that emotionally I felt I would find the most difficult to deal with. Fortunately, I didn't have to, but it left a lot of scars of the people that were trying to look after those situations.
Hard, very hard. Early taste of what we also learned through the COVID pandemic, of course, when we had landscapes and places that were suddenly devoid of tourists and people who traditionally propped up the tourism economy in those places. And then the experience of seeing landscapes actually without the same grazing pressures, and how those landscapes responded in that context.
One of the positives I felt of COVID, and there aren't many, I guess remote working is probably one of them, and the fact that we jumped a decade in a day in terms of how those systems work. And in fact, Richard Pearce, who was the gentleman who spent a lot of time at Microsoft, he said they had the tools and the techniques 15 years before ready to make that possible, but no one wanted them until COVID landed. When we opened up again, I felt there was this rush of connection to the natural world that wasn't there before because it had been taken away from people. Was there a similar sense post foot and mouth? Did people sort of celebrate access again? And
very much so, very much so. And I recall I'm fast forwarding now to the next stage of my career, but I went on to become a founding director of Natural England, and I recall vividly the weekend when, having been handed the chief executive role, whilst the substantive chief executive was on holiday abroad, there was briefly an outbreak of foot and mouth in Surrey. I don't know if you recall the occasion, but it turned out to have been a false alarm. There had been an outbreak that had been caused from a laboratory on an adjacent animal food and health asset. But I do recall that weekend, and I had a lot of phone calls from board members and other stakeholders who had been through that 2001 outbreak, sensitizing me to the impact of the original outbreak to tourist economies and land managers, and there were a lot of still very raw memories from that period of time.
Yeah, I bet.
Just to conclude on my, I guess my career background, I went on to run Green Alliance, which was really the beginning, the culmination of me being able to bring the political environmental interests together. That was in the mid-2000s. I was there for 3 years, and in many ways, the dream job for me. The only thing that had at that stage occurred to me that I wanted to do with my next stage of my career was to go on and take a sort of senior role in a public sector organisation.
Why?
Well, interesting you should ask that. Back at that stage, I think it felt like the public sector was growing. That's felt like where it was at. Labour had invested heavily in delivery bodies. And in the end, the backdrop and the specific opportunity, which was to go and be our founding executive director on the executive board of Natural England, a new flagship environmental body, was kind of too good an opportunity to miss. And it was the opportunity in that case, in this instance, to be part of creating a new organisation, to be involved in the process of that merger, the creation of a single identity culturally for that
help people
organisation.
understand what sort of bodies were pulled together to.
Yeah, so this is back in 2006. So on the back of the foot and mouth outbreak, a chap called Lord Haskins had recommended to government that there needed to be a proper separation of policy and delivery, and that the delivery arrangements were fragmented. It sounds like an echo of where we are today, but nonetheless, there was some method in the madness that you had to create Natural England, two independent agencies, English Nature and the Countryside Agency, coming together with a bit of core DEFRA, what was called the Rural Development Service, the people out there who are out there delivering agri-environment schemes and grant incentives to farmers. So the idea was you're bringing together the integration of nature protection with landscape and access and the delivery tools and the incentives on the ground. It was a good idea in theory, and it's what's led us to the Natural England we have with its remit today.
And how many years were you in Natural England for?
So I was there for 12 years. I served in a number of different executive roles over that time. I grew with that organisation. I was lucky. I was in there on the executive team at very early stage in my career, in my early 30s. I was on a very steep learning curve. And I went from an external affairs role to a delivery role, and lastly, the chief operating officer responsible for the organisation's local delivery, the delivery of agri-environment, the delivery of its national processing and licensing, land use planning functions.
When you think back now, what were your favourite bits, and what were you most proud of in terms of your time there?
I mean, I'd go straight to my role in advising government on how it could go about delivering its manifesto commitment to improve coastal access. A really great distillation of my different skills, and the opportunity was post-establishing Natural England. There had been a manifesto commitment the Labour Party had entered into to consult on how it could improve coastal access. This was after the rollout of the open access provisions through the Countryside and Rights of Way Act. And it was highly contentious. And as you may recall, the open access provisions were, back at the time, highly contentious, quite polarising a debate between landowners and the public access lobby. The opportunity was to come up with a solution that was less polarising, and also looked at the integration of the drivers for better access, better protection of the environment around our coast, to enable people to experience the coastal environment in a way that gave them just more than just access to the beach. And we came up with a solution in dialogue with stakeholders. So we co-designed a solution. It was scalable. Behind it was the idea of the this coastal buffer that could be that would retreat as coastal erosion took effect. And within that coastal buffer, there was an opportunity for land managers, farmers to enhance that coastal strip. But that vision for a path, the length of the English coastline, was, I think, a really inspirational vision. And in the end, as a result of the work I did to persuade the Labour government to embed those provisions in the Marine and Coastal Access Act, I sold a vision for taking what was quite a technocratic piece of legislation, which unlocked the opportunity to designate a whole range of new coastal marine conservation zones and coastal protection. But the idea that you could embed in that a provision which was much more about enabling people to enjoy and appreciate for themselves the coastal environment they bought. And
I love how much that still makes you smile now. It's great.
So I'm looking forward to seeing the day when the coastal, all England coastal path is finally completed. I played a small part in that.
What did you find the most challenging or frustrating aspects of the roles?
Yeah, in many ways, the answer to that question is then what led me to move myself on. And I think, Natural England was created as I mentioned with with a high expectation of the ability to bring together a regulatory remit with the tools to incentivise land use change, positive land use change, and primarily the agri-environment scheme. Back in the day, it was the flagship environmental stewardship scheme. And a lot of effort was invested in thinking about how that scheme could be targeted to best effect. Lots of good work being done on the ground by people as Natural England was vested to target those schemes at the right farmers in the right places. And I saw over time how the gap, I guess, between that ambition, that expectation, and the reality of how those incentives worked in practice on the ground. And as I saw a second wave of agri-environment being designed and another all too predictable wave of challenges around designing the right controls, designing the IT system to enable the farmers to access the schemes came through.
And that's not an insignificant project. That's millions of pounds worth of investment.
It's a massive program, but it became under the Common Agricultural Policy, it became a kind of 7-year kind of predictable cycle of high expectations leading to, flawed scheme design and over-engineering of schemes, leading ultimately to dashed expectations. It gets fixed within the cycle. The scheme's better and good enough, and at that point you reset and go again. So that experience, I guess, to come back to your question, that experience of seeing these well-intentioned...
Because you'd seen the whole cycle, hadn't you, in your time? Because you were there long enough to see that go then come again.
Exactly that. So that experience, coupled with the experience of working with stakeholders and seeing the expectations of the farming industry or the people who represent the farming industry, and the sense of entitlement around the access to subsidies and what that feeds, led me to conclude that the system needed reform.
Can you explain what you mean about that point?
I mean, I think the challenge we've got is we've got now a farming industry which has been through 3 generations of access to an agricultural subsidy regime, previously under the European Common Agricultural Policy, and is almost the sort of post the dig for war kind of mentality that was sort of drove a lot of the thinking around agricultural policy post war.
Yeah.
And it's almost lost that connection, therefore, with the market, with the sort of commercial drivers. It's been numbed to those commercial drivers and the connection to what I know many individual farmers and land managers care about and understand and have expertise in, which is great use of land to deliver great outcomes for people, communities, and landscapes. And the connection between those people and the subsidy regime over time, I think, has been lost.
Yep, a lot of farms now see subsidy as revenue and think it's been earned, and it hasn't. A subsidy is inherently so. On a previous podcast, I had a great guy, Alex Godfrey, on who talked about financial markets and how subsidies are used in other sectors. They're used for a period to create a change in a market. They're not a perpetual sticking plaster on something that's broken. If you break your arm, you don't want to wear a cast forever. You want to fix that and move on. And farming fraternity don't want to. They want to keep, and at the risk of, I think we're seeing them not allowing themselves to benefit and grow and improve and have things better. And things like no farmers, no food rhetoric has just ripped any form of positivity or support for farmers away because it's sought to position themselves as different and entitled. And on the back of the inheritance tax thing, the way that was handled really, really not played out well in the court of public opinion, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think farmers do clearly care about these things themselves. We see organisations like the Farmers for Wildlife, Martin Lyne's organisation, increasingly powerful voices in this debate. But I think the evolution from the old agri-environment schemes, particularly with the original sort of income foregone incentive that was sort of baked into those schemes, we still haven't made that evolution from those. We
had Jake Fines on the podcast last week, and we've got Joe Stanley on soon to talk about what it feels like from their perspective. So we'll be able to balance that out with, because it's not like on the flip side of everything we've just said there, it's a really challenging time to try and be a farmer, because it must feel like everything that your business is built on is against you because of the changes that are happening. So it just shows the complexity and the compromises we have to make in this world.
Yeah, 100%. And coming back to your question, that in the end, was what led me to move myself on
Just
from
before
Natural
we
England.
depart Natural England, were you still there when there was the sort of triennial review period and the discussion of merging Natural England and the Environment Agency? And what's your recollections of that time?
Yeah, so my recollection of that was that it was a very tough time for Natural England. So the coalition government came in with a mindset that it wanted to see a reduction in the Quango state, that it wanted the organisations to justify their existence. In Natural England, there was a particular friction, I guess, around the role that our people played in delivering advice to local planning authorities and developers under the habitats regulations, which meant that we were more in the glare of the naysayers.
Because power-wise, the dynamic at the time there was very much the EA was the more powerful organisation.
It felt very much that way, and actually we had a period of time that played out where we had a period of time without a substantive chief executive. So the executive team pulled together, and we worked very collegiately through that period of time. But it was a tough
so I was
experience.
I wasn't yet in a director role at the Environment Agency at that time. I was running a kind of business consultancy unit where I'd be lent out to whichever exec director was facing the most challenging problem and was asked to do their thinking for them, essentially. And I remember being in the head office in Bristol, and essentially the conversation was, it's been decided, organisations are going to be merged, announcement tomorrow, it's coming. Yeah. Next morning follows, decision had been changed overnight.
Yeah. Well, I think in the end, the Lib Dem presence in the coalition government made the difference, and the environmental NGOs made the difference in the sense that they felt there was a need. If a merger had taken place, we would have lost a voice for the natural environment inside government. Now, I suppose my other reflection on that, stepping back, of course, now looking back from the outside, is that in those situations and those processes like triennial reviews tend to drive very polarised, reductive thinking. In those situations, what do leaders do? What do the incumbents do? They circle the wagons. They perpetuate that sense of entitlement, I guess, around an existing set of functions. It's just what you do. You defend your remit. You defend your place and my reflection is there still remains a very strong rationale for consolidation of organisational remits in the DEFRA landscape, and we've just seen an independent economist come in and conduct an independent review of the regulatory landscape, Dan Corrie, and I think he's steered well clear actually of the institutional landscape, but he's reflected on the regulatory landscape in DEFRA and has made a pretty compelling case, I would say, for a reset of that landscape.
I remember the nature of the questions that were coming in from government that were causing absolute panic in the EA. They were nothing different than I get on a daily basis. I think the difference is a much bigger organisation, and they weren't used to responding to stuff at pace, in detail, with accuracy. It just wasn't what the model was built for. Yeah, I will get that question every day from a board member, and I think it loops back to your conversation start about building the environment sector. If we want to be investable and professional, all that, if you're in a financial institution, that information is available at the touch of a button, or you know it immediately and you'd respond to it and it was there. And that professionalism just certainly wasn't there, and I still think isn't there in the sort of broader environment sector. I would have merged them and still would, and I would think the organisation should be half the size, if not smaller, but actually have some teeth, actually have more teeth and more power and more ability to do things. My view on the whole regulatory landscape is we need far fewer of them, but it'd be nice if we actually used some of them.
And I would say exactly the same, Richard. There needs to
and
be...
And we've lived it as well.
There's a case for a modern, streamlined environmental protection agency. And I'm saying that now with the benefit of course, I'm stepping back, looking back into the system from the outside. It's so much easier.
It is. I wouldn't have said the same thing at the time.
But I think the other point, and I'll come back to the next evolution in my journey, but the the point is that it's the regulatory framework that that needs the reform. It's we won't learn how to evolve and simplify and consolidate the institutional landscape until we can understand how to make better use of the post-Brexit opportunity to evolve our regulatory landscape.
We did a long form podcast with George Eustace. I don't know if you listened to the George one.
I did.
I don't know how long but we went hours, and it was and it was. I wish George had been more out front during Brexit debates, because he spoke so coherently and clearly about what the potential opportunity was and why he felt so. It had nothing to do with, racism and bigotry and anything that was plastered on the front of the tabloids. It was all about literally how to make a better environment and process and the systems thinking. Such a sophisticated approach to it. So shout out to George's episode. I thought he was excellent.
He was brilliant. I really enjoyed his interview, and I had a really cathartic coffee with him a couple of weeks back where we shared a similar set of reflections.
Love it. It's like the Survivors group.
Yeah, and the other interesting aspect of that interview was, he's a Brexiteer, of course, unashamedly, but the candour still around the recognition that part of the nervousness about evolving our regulatory landscape outside of Europe was the role of the important role of the European Commission and the ability to go to the ECJ to hold a member state to account, and how in the absence of that we instill ambition in a government when they're always beholden to these short-term electoral cycles. So he's absolutely right about that, of course, but neither is it right that we hang on to the status quo, because I think what we've got is a regulatory framework which reflects 2 or 3 decades of transposing EU directives and increasing attention to the process by which those directives are implemented, and in particular the de-risking the role of the decision maker and the regulator in that process, rather than de-risking the role of the regulated.
It goes back to this is a John Elkington quote, who I've started my own John Elkington fan club, and you're trying to run a 21st century economy on a 13th century operating system.
100%. 100%.
And you've got several million people. I'm leaving the NHS aside from this because I've never worked in it other than being very grateful for what it's done for me and my family. So leaving the NHS aside, the rest of the civil service is principally there to stop change happening. Like, I literally had permanent secretary. Our job is to make sure things don't change quickly, and if they do, let's slow it down a bit more.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah,
so
that's what the machine does.
It is, yeah. And people don't understand that unless they've lived it or watched Yes Minister back to back to back. Do you ever catch yourself feeling like you're in one of those episodes? I remember when I was in meetings and I was like, Can other people hear this? Like, am I mad? Like, when you get told up is down or left is right, or it was... Yeah, it was like living Yes... I describe it as living Yes Minister without the comedy.
Yeah, Yes Minister and all too often the thick of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's true. Final point I'll make on the public sector stuff is, boy, has Tony Juniper done a job. So, pre-Tony, when I stepped away from the public sector... Natural England had years and years of budget cuts to the point whereby I had an area manager for them in my office asking if he could take some paper with him because he couldn't purchase paper. Like, literally crying on my shoulder because that was the level of budgetary cuts. And from a time when the Environment Agency was very much in the ascendancy because of flood money and things like that, Tony's role in terms of putting a spotlight on Natural England, what an incredible job. And not in the absence of personal attacks on him because he's an environmentalist. He stood there in an environmentalist T-shirt people go, that guy's an environmentalist. I know, he's literally wearing a Friends of the Earth T-shirt. How are you surprised about this? Yet they're still running articles against him. So it'd be a miss if I didn't shout out and say what a job he's done.
Well, absolutely. And shout out to Michael Gove for appointing him in the first place, 100%. Right? Brave appointment. And
best Environment Secretary I worked with.
Very conscious appointment. Yeah, 100%. And going back to the post-Brexit opportunity, Michael Gove got that, created the basis on which we could leverage it.
If he watches it, we're trying to get him on. So George reached out. I would love to get Michael Gove on and have the conversation.
But what Tony has done, absolutely, to rebuild Natural England's confidence, to get out there and defend its remit and purpose, has been... He
gave it some pride. He was like, have pride in your convictions about the environment. And he had some bravery and some honesty. And I think the fact that we're now facing a Planning and Infrastructure Bill Part 3 that will, if it goes through, will plough a load of additional money into Natural England, I think that's a bad thing. I think that will just increase bureaucracy and slow things down.
Yeah.
However, from where Tony's sat, that's a hell of a job. And if I was in natural
100%.
England, I'd be proud of him.
Yeah, no, I concur completely. But we need to come back to the planning bill.
We will. Okay, so let's take us when you first. How quickly between you going, do you know what, I'm ready for the next chapter, and you actually stepping away? What was that period of time look like?
Probably longer than it should have been, Rich, if I'm honest.
Verbatim, that's the phrase every single person who talks about that says.
Right.
Yeah. So break that down for us a
I
little.
mean, it's a stage in my life when I was, by then I'd married, I'd got young children, and
responsibilities.
You're thinking about your responsibilities. A stable public sector, senior public sector job feels like the right place to be at that stage.
I found it quite. You were a bit further on in your career than I was when I departed, and certainly had more of a breadth of experience because I'd come straight PhD into the EA, and I had 16 jobs in 9 years. So I was just like bang, 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 bang. I didn't have any exposure to the wider world. And when you're in that public sector machine, you're constantly told, oh, the outside world's really scary and terrible and you don't want to go there. And then when you come out with the public sector CV, the language, the achievements, the terminologies don't work in a commercial world. It just, they don't mesh.
Well, that's right. That's exactly right. And you can persuade yourself because, of course, you do get the opportunity to move from function to function. And as a senior leader, just as you did, you get that privilege actually to work with new leadership teams and new functions and acquire new experience and knowledge, but you can oversell it to yourself. You kid yourself, you're reinventing yourself and acquiring new skills when to a degree it's the same skills applied in a
same game on different pitch,
different context. Yeah.
I've never heard it described that way, but that's how it felt.
Right.
Yeah, completely.
Right. And I mean, so that ate away at me for quite a long time, and I guess then coming back to your point about the fit between the experience and skills you acquire in the public sector and moving into a more commercial context. What was starting to eat away at me was the recognition that the opportunity to deliver my why really lay in the ability to incentivize the private sector differently, and how with a track record, without any commercial track record, with a career that comprised exclusively of experience in the environmental NGO world and the public sector.
You'd never sold a pound. You'd never you'd managed big budgets and a large number of people, but no commercial.
I'd run charities and I'd rebuilt their funding, and I knew I was commercial. I'd done stuff that was commercial, but how without that explicitly commercial track record, without having managed a P&L, do I move myself on in that mid-career stage into the private sector? So that's what led me to then look at regulated utilities, because that felt like the only way I could make that move.
And that was a logical. We saw that quite a lot, didn't we? There's a logical career path of the. I often remember reading when an organisation experiences a recruitment freeze, which happened all the time during our time. That's the equivalent of writing every one of your employees' name on a wall behind you. The better they are, the bigger you write the name and throw a dart over your head. Because the ones that are the most talented have the ability to depart. And we saw lots of really talented people, like the acting chief exec at the Environment Agency stepped away to a water company. Lots of people did in that route because it made logical sense. The language was the same.
That's right. It's right. I mean, it's referred, I think, disparagingly to as a revolving door now in the context of some of the challenges of the water sector. But nonetheless, it's a natural thing to do. They're complementary skills. You have experience of regulating a sector. You understand that sector. So that led me to looking.
It's no different from someone moving from the Premiership to the La Liga or Serie A. It's like equivalent, slightly different salary band.
Indeed. I had a look around. I wanted to look before I moved. It led me to do a placement at Wessex Water. They were one of the better, more progressive, much better run water companies in the south of England, where I'd chosen to make my family home. And
that's a big part of it too. So how old were your kids at this point?
Yeah, so they were young. They were still primary school. Yeah.
That's a big people. I think when you were earlier in your career. So we moved a lot when it was just my wife and I. And I'm one of my things is people often ask about the sacrifices you make to run a business or to found a company, and I often comment, it's not necessarily your sacrifices that are the ones that are made. If you ask a partner to move and follow you and give up their support system, and it just gets harder with children, and that balance between you can take a chance on moving for a role if you're on your own or if it's just you and your partner, but if you're also moving the children out of school, that's a lot of pressure.
I think that's right. I think it's possibly something that just distinguishes the two of us, actually, Rich. My experience of being moved around as a child, I think I've worked out it's subliminally become something that's a red line for me.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
And I wasn't conscious of that, but it has become something that has definitely limited me, actually, in terms of my career development.
Yeah.
But that need to, just having put some roots down, give my children the stability.
So does that area, is that home to you now, the Wessex area? That feels.
Well, I live outside the Wessex area, actually, but I live in the south of England, in Hampshire, and that has become home. We've put roots down there. I've seen my boys now through to secondary school. My eldest is 16, about to go and do his A-levels, and we're not budging.
I don't have an affiliation with a place, so I don't have a place that I call home.
Yeah.
You know, some people love. I'm closest to Worcester, and people are really passionate about Worcester as a place. Like, our head of environment adores it. My home is where Helen and the kids are. Outside of that, I'm agnostic because I travel so much, and sometimes I catch myself because I don't feel that draw to a place.
Yeah.
But equally, we've made it a feature of the business. So I travel a lot, and whilst I haven't spent and grown a connection to one place, I've seen lots. So it's a breadth rather than a depth.
Well, it was a pin of the map thing for me and my wife in the end. We were living in southwest London. We had a small flat, 2-year-old. We couldn't afford to upgrade locally, so it was an hour out on the train. Hampshire, that'll do. Quality of life, state schools are good connections, and there we've remained.
Happy wife, happy life.
Yeah, exactly. So the placement gave me an opportunity to take a look, and I badged it and undertook it as an opportunity to role model industry exchange, actually, within Natural England.
Was that how you actually filed it in your head?
No, entirely, actually. Yeah. And I actually came back and wrote a report for the executive team on the experience and what I felt we could learn as an organisation, having looked at back at Natural England through the lens of a regulated.
Can you remember
water
now
utility.
what you enjoyed the most about that different experience?
About the placement, it was just getting a little taste of something that was a bit more commercial. I mean, a water utility is still a long way from a really truly commercial environment, but it felt very different to the environment I'd been.
And was there anything you missed about Natural England while you were away at that point?
I mean, there was a month out. During that month, I think we hit a farm payments crisis, and my team had to handle that in my absence. And I returned, I think, on the 2nd of January to a phone call with the permanent secretary and straight back to...
Welcome back.
So I think, it's a rhetorical answer to your question.
Excellent. I understood.
So having taken a look at Wessex, I discovered my focus in Wessex was very much, show me how, as a water company, you can innovate and do things differently and better to deliver your regulated obligations for the environment. And in doing so, make a better contribution to nature. That was the lens. That was almost the exam question I went in to answer. And they've done some good stuff. They've as a company, they've been more actively involved in working with farmers and NGOs in their catchments, partly by necessity, because they had a very rural series of catchments and owned small, highly distributed assets that it didn't make it cost effective to focus on as the basis on which they were improving water quality. And as a result, they, particularly in one catchment in Dorset, in the Poole Harbour catchment, they'd really, over a 15, 20-year period, evolved a really strong collaborative relationship with the farming industry there to take to promote better farming practices, take them on a journey from early awareness raising, voluntary incentives to a fully fledged scheme.
I think that's probably around about the first time I heard the term catchment-based approach.
Right.
Can you break that down for people? So
the catchment-based approach is about, a catchment is clearly how the water drains off the land. It's about the geography that a water company obviously thinks about the world through. The catchment-based approach is fundamentally about moving away from thinking about the bottom end of the catchment, and in particular from a water company perspective, its assets, its treatment works, its sewage treatment works, its water supply works, and actually thinking about how it can influence the outcomes it's delivering by working upstream of those assets. So moving away from an exclusive focus on precise engineered grey infrastructure solutions, as we describe them, to a much more collaborative approach to working with a whole range of stakeholders, actually, but clearly the people that manage and own the land come at the very top of that
I think
hierarchy.
there's, when we go back on these lovely nostalgic trips, there's like for every idea like that catches the zeitgeist for a year or two or three, there's 20 that didn't. Ideas, suggestions that just get pushed away. But one or two aspects of that gets put in whatever this future market or economy looks like. And it is one Lego building block. So catchment-based approach. We'd now think about holistic land management. We'd think about others paying for elements of it, the interconnectivity of this. Without the concept of a catchment-based approach, you don't get to BNG, you don't get to water trading, things like that. But you don't know without looking back where we've collected all these little bits and pieces. When people challenge natural capital markets about, why they're not perfect already, I always look back and I'm like, hold on a second. Financial markets have been going centuries. Are they perfect? Did they not make mistakes and get things wrong? They're always iterating and adjusting. And as I say, looking back, you can see all these little building blocks that are coming together now, and that Lego pyramid's getting higher and higher.
100%. No, I mean, look at what happens in 2008 and the learnings that evolved from the financial crash. Some very significant learnings and lessons I think we can actually take into the design of nature markets as a result.
Just imagine when we're sat here, or actually it'll be these guys sat here and replacing us in the chairs, they'll be talking about the equivalent of credit default swaps for carbon credits. We will make that same mistake. There will be an insurance against the failure, a traded insurance product against the failure to deliver an environmental obligation. Yeah. And people will think it's wonderful and then invent a product and then that system will fall.
Yeah, and wearing my EnTrade hat, the separation of the fees you pay for a product from the separation of the fees you pay for a service, absolutely intrinsic to how we've thought about the role of an intermediary, a market intermediary, in managing a nature market.
So you've returned to natural England, still with the itch of there's something more here now.
Yeah. So that kind of was enough. So Wessex had created EnTrade on the back of the innovation journey it had been on in one catchment.
So the title and the concept was sat in Wessex already.
It had been created, and a really stunning. And I think Wessex does not get enough credit for what it did with EnTrade in the first instance. So it kind of the innovation journey there actually started with Prince of Wales in that catchment, where Prince of Wales at the time was challenging water companies to do more by working upstream with farmers in their catchments, and obviously Duchy of Cornwall had some significant assets in that particular catchment, and it led in the end to Wessex brokering a deal with the Environment Agency to say, you're requiring us to deliver a 40-ton reduction in nitrates to offset the impact of a Duchy of Cornwall development in Dorchester. Let's take that 40-ton requirement, and instead of building that piece of kit at the Dorchester treatment works, why don't we look at that 40-ton reduction and see how we can incentivise farmers to deliver that through different land use practices. It's as simple as that. And of course, you've got one buyer, Wessex, collaborating with a group of sellers, suppliers, farmers, supplying pretty simple projects in this case, cover crops, arable reversion, and it's a market. It's the early stages of a market, which led Wessex then to creating EnTrade. They discovered that in a one buyer to multiple supplier collaboration, there's scope for running a market, using a market mechanism. They use a reverse auction, which is an obvious tool to use in that context. And they innovated and they created a platform, which was a super neat piece of innovation. It was utilising the modelling that Wessex had done over 10 or 15 years to understand how different land use practices in different parts of the catchment could reduce the nitrate leaching. And the tool enabled the farmers to bid and understand in real time the efficacy of their bids in delivering that nitrate reduction. So it was natty. It was natty.
And what timestamp this for people? What year?
So this was in the 2015 to 2020 asset management period.
So early in the consideration.
Yeah. So the world in the water industry clearly is all about these, as you know, Rich, it is all about these 5-yearly
AMP periods,
price cycles, the AMP periods. So it's in that 15 to 20 asset management period. So Wessex looked at me and said, "Well, we've got the beginnings of something here," and it was just the early stages of people starting to think about a natural capital approach. Michael Gove just taken office in DEFRA, there was a big conversation about public funding for public goods. I think Michael Gove had a real vision for what he wanted to see.
He did it too well, didn't he? He made the job too big and was making it a mainline role, so they moved him aside.
Well, and we should talk about ELMS, because I think the way he created the original trials and test program was all about going out and saying, well, how do we create this market? How do we use public funding to best effect to catalyse this market? It's not what we've got in the scheme we have today, but it could be. That's where we need to be going.
To continue the Michael Gove love fest, so I'm not suggesting for a second he's perfect by any stretch, and his political decisions and posturing and knife wielding in elections is interesting. But worked with a lot of Secretary of States. The only one I saw who ever genuinely listened to understand. Literally everyone he would meet, he would listen to take their point on board, not wait to just give a prepared line, or in the case of Liz Truss and Theresa Coffey, just ignore them completely and walk past them or spout some completely incoherent rubbish.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really enjoyed working.
And he challenged the water companies. He challenged the water companies to demonstrate they could deliver in the public interest. It wasn't like the water companies didn't have warning.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were approached by Wessex Water at this point?
So Wessex, I mean, it was a classic. Right, you've got a skill set we need. We have something here. We have an innovative market mechanism. They'd already set it up as an independent entity. So they'd sat it in a little business unit externally from the water services company. They'd got obviously a platform around it. They'd branded it. You come here because there's a market mechanism we could see could be the beginning of a new market. And this is about creating the future of how the water industry could be incentivised differently. But we recognise we need somebody who can come in with the skills to help demonstrate to policy and regulation how to create that market.
So we won't bore listeners with how jobs work in the public sector, but coming from a very unusual recruitment-based environment, how did it feel to be headhunted for something like that?
Unique for me. There was a expectation that I'd grown used to, that you go into these processes with the sort of tried and tested headhunter, or in the public sector, the competency-based interview.
It's ludicrous.
Yeah. The game.
So for those of you who
games
you rock up and tell a structured story in loads of different ways. The decision's already made about who they're hiring, but you're made to do this song and dance because we've got to be seen to be doing the right thing.
It's a totally different mindset. So the mindset is, we've got something here. You prove you could come here and fit. You need to demonstrate you are that square peg in that square hole, as opposed to, we've got this person here with this skill set here. We've got an opportunity. How do we define this opportunity to enable this person to come in?
How do they make that even more exciting than what we thought? Oh, no. Yeah. The reason I asked the question is, when I came out of the public sector, it took an amazing organisation called Sanctus to see that potential in me, and they had to help me become more commercial and teach me how to take one skill set to another. And in a world where you had to fight and justify your existence in your current job regularly, to be headhunted was a real change for me. And so shout out to Sean, Pete and Al, thank you. Appreciate you all.
100%. And David Elliott, for me, David was the director who hired me. He had a remit, a free-ranging remit, and again, credit actually to Colin Skellett, who was the chief executive of Wessex Water, as was. Now, my boss, group chief executive of YTL UK, the shareholder that owns Wessex, David had a remit effectively to go out there and innovate and look at how you could create new markets on the edge of the capabilities and the functions that you can have in a water company, and I think that points to where water companies could be doing much more to innovate. Actually, that was his remit, and he brought me in that spirit.
Amazing. Yeah. We've stepped away from the public sector, and we are now in the EnTrade world. So, talk us through that process. What does that look like, and what are we doing today?
So it's been a very long story of innovation. Longer than I would have liked, longer than I imagined. At the outset, my vision was creating a high integrity marketplace to enable funding.
Was that need for high integrity clear from day one?
Yes, it was. It was always crystal clear for me. And the vision, very simplistically, was you've got public funding going into this place to deliver nature restoration. How do you go about complementing that public funding with private private funding from entities who need to deliver their regulated obligations for environmental improvement. So things like entities like water companies, housing developers, and potentially corporates with an interest in that particular landscape. So it was as simple as that. Naively, I thought it was about building on the platform that I inherited to deliver that value proposition. 7 long years later, I know a lot more. I'm older and wiser, and I know that market design is not a simple process. It was a story of very much of two phases. First couple of years, a slightly lost couple of years, where it became I was seeking to work with the incentives the company had to use a catchment management function to explore how we could innovate with the scheme we had in place. And it quickly became apparent to me that the limitations of both the software that I'd inherited, but importantly, the notion of a one-sided market, the idea of reverse auction quite quickly hit the buffers. Because it was political, actually. I mean, I think unfairly on Wessex and EnTrade, because they'd in good faith created this mechanism. They'd done what they could to work out how you optimise better outcomes for all participants, for the farmers, for the water company, and indeed for the environment, importantly, with a reverse auction. But I think it became DEFRA and government started to get excited about the idea of
Can you illustrate how that might work to people through a project as an example of what people would experience in that reverse auction?
Yeah, so you would be asking for a specific landscape. You'd be going out to a group of farmers, and asking them to bid for a specific price, a project that would deliver a given outcome. And it's then the role of a reverse auction then is in ensuring the buyer of that outcome is getting best value for money. Simple as that. And that, I think, understandably started to become characterised as a race to the bottom. And it became political because DEFRA started to think about, well, if this is working for a specific scheme in a specific place, maybe we could do this nationally. Maybe this is something we need to be exploring when it comes to the evolution of the new ELMS scheme. So it quickly became apparent to me that the idea of evolving a one-sided market was not a runner for some good and some political reasons. So that led us
Could it be resold in that scenario? So did the mechanism allow landowner A to say, I will deliver you that outcome, receive funding, and sell the delivery of it onto a third party who would do it?
Conceivably, but my conclusion was if you wanted something that could be scaled and was going to build trust and confidence with the farming industry, we had to start again.
I don't think there's elements of what you originally built that I think are quite exciting still. And actually, we see tenders come out now, and we're not in the business of selling a commodity product. So the carbon credits we have. So this podcast will come out after our public announcement, but next week at London Climate Week, we will announce the sale of the highest value nature-based carbon credit that's ever been done, £125 a tonne at PIU level. We're not racing to the bottom of anything. Right. However, there are people who are calling for millions of tons of carbon, and they do want that. They do want that mechanism still, and I think there is a place for that. So how did you evolve your platform?
Yeah, so I think two things happened. First of all, I came to this view that this was not going to be a scalable proposition. And at the same time, of course, we've hit 2020 and COVID happened. And that gave me that ability to take stock and reset. And importantly, the online working gave me the ability to work across the globe. Suddenly, the whole world was working differently.
Yeah.
And I was able to reach out to partners and stakeholders across the globe to understand how you could evolve the idea of a marketplace. So I set about on two fronts. I set about a journey to work bottom up by demonstrating what a two-sided high integrity marketplace for nature recovery would look like, and then top down, as I'd describe it, to work with national policy and regulation to argue for the policy changes, the regulatory changes that could enable those markets to be scaled. And it led us to creating a coalition of organisations to recommend to government a series of policy developments that would enable government to scale those markets. And at the outset, the proposition to government was, you need to start to think about how you evolve the post-Brexit window to optimise the ability to use ELMS with the next Water Industry National Environment Programme, what's called the WINEP, very significant investment of regulated expenditure in environmental improvement, alongside the private incentives. So at this stage, biodiversity net gain in its infancy as a mechanism, Environment Act hadn't come to fruition, but I could see the opportunity, that very short window of opportunity to optimise that post-Brexit window to deliver, to enable these markets to get up at scale. That was the proposition to regulators and to government, whilst we get on and demonstrate what that looks like on the ground. And it's been a long and tortuous process, but as a result of that innovation, we now do have a market model that works. We've evolved EnTrade from where it started to where it is today, which is essentially a central counterparty. It provides a role in bringing together land managers and farmers who want to supply nature-based projects with businesses who want to acquire the credits that arise that are generated by the environmental services delivered by those projects.
And do they purely relate to carbon and BNG?
They don't. We haven't gone anywhere near carbon yet, as Rich, because for reasons I can come to. But for the time being, we're working solely with the regulated drivers for those credits, which is nutrient mitigation and biodiversity net gain. Yeah, and the reason for that is those are the two approved standards that the mechanism we've created, the Environmental Markets Board, has approved to use in our pilot markets. And coming to your point on carbon, we want to, for the time being, to focus on the local benefits that these markets can generate, and the conflation of a local benefit with a global commodity in carbon is quite a hard one to deal with in terms of how you deal with that in terms of regulation. So that's what's got us to what we've got to today.
And have we now put live transactions and trades through the system?
Yeah. So in 2023, we worked on the bottom up. We worked in two catchments. We chose catchments very consciously as the geography that we thought would be the best environment to test these markets. In one context, we worked with a couple of wildlife trusts to create a market in the Bristol Avon. And the Wildlife Trust secured a grant from government. Our proposition to government, which was to say, you go out, you could see this window of opportunity, you go and create 10 or 12 investment scale projects where mechanisms like EnTrade, it wouldn't be exclusive to EnTrade, but mechanisms like EnTrade could be used to de-risk public funding, to test how regulation could evolve, fell largely on deaf ears, sadly, but it did lead to the creation.
Do you have a thesis as to why?
I just don't think government has the bandwidth to take on board. Well, there's a couple of things there, actually. I mean, there's the bandwidth thing, and we were a small outfit, and even with my connections and networks, it's still very hard to cut through. This is in the middle of the first lockdown.
Yeah.
So there's that playing out. I think the other thing we could perhaps come back to was the I guess it's about the behaviour of the. I think it's about how organisations behave in these situations, and the tendency for organisations to fight for organisational survival at the expense, I think, of thinking about how we can optimise the environment to the benefit of the outcomes. And I think, sadly, and I understand why it played out at this point in time, because organisations like environmental NGOs were on their uppers.
Yeah.
Legacies were draining away. They were having to make significant job cuts.
Well, and it's the role of the CEOs there to fight for those organisations and
it
those
comes
people.
back to my reflections earlier. That's what you do. That's what you do.
I did it. I would have fought to keep stuff in the EA when I was there.
100%. So it's how do you project over that? And part of this is about me and my makeup, which is about I see the system, I look at the system as a whole. I am an idealist. I can see how that system could be reconfigured to deliver far better outcomes. And what we still haven't got right is how that system works to deliver environmental improvement. We've got the foundations in place. You've had people like Richard Benwell through this room talking about the Environment Act, and very significant advances have been made. We have legally binding targets to deliver environmental improvement. We have an environmental improvement plan, which is intended to bring those targets
together. Your
together.
reference to Rich is an interesting one, because I think whilst he would like to improve an environment, he wants it to be improved in the exact system and structures that currently exist, and he's wedded to protecting those. So it almost weds the only thing we can have in that model is a slower decline. Whereas we need different system structures. We need to build the environment sector you opened by describing to have the ability to make significant changes, improvements. If we can't be regenerative, we're just slowing the rate of decay.
100%. So how do we take the architecture we've got and pivot to a new system? Now, the foundations are in place. We have the Agricultural Act, we have the Climate Change Act, we have the Environment Act. So that we've got the legally binding targets. We've got to move to using public funding for public goods. But we know that will be insufficient to deliver the nature restoration and to deliver those environmental.
And then we go sod it and put a planning and infrastructure bill in place and say just write a check and forget about the environment.
Indeed. I mean, look at this globally, right? We have a £700 billion gap to finance to restore nature. I think that's an underestimate.
I also think so. That sentence is so decadent to the environmentalists. So that sentence in a real world would say there's a 700 billion investment opportunity that will return 3 trillion. And this is what the environment sector doesn't do. It says, you need to give us 700 billion and stops talking. It doesn't say, would you like 3 trillion? Then give us 700 billion. They don't believe in a return. Like I saw a statement yesterday about the government are going to invest 100 million of water company fines in projects. No, they're not. They're going to give 100 million pounds to charities and NGOs to do things. That's not an investment. We don't even speak the right language.
100%. So how do we go from the paradigm we're into the paradigm you and I are describing? And that's what I was looking at back in 2020, actually, was, okay, there's this...
And were you in the same spot mentally in 2020 as you are now?
Yeah,
broadly?
no, yeah, 100%. So it was about how there's a lot of rhetoric out there. There was a growing sense of optimism around private investment being the kind of being part of the solution. Michael Gove had done his bit to unlock that. Actually, he created the Council for Sustainable Business. The 25-year environment plan talked very explicitly about private investment in nature recovery. We had the targets in place. We had
you
the
started getting the
coming.
companies popping up. You were working on your stuff. Highland Rewilding had popped up and bought their first couple of estates. Nattergal had started to buy. We came in 2021, so it started to become.
That's right. That's exactly right. So my interest, the exam question I was trying to ask at that stage in terms of what I was doing nationally was, what is the barrier to unlocking that private investment? What is the barrier to getting that return on that opportunity you've just described? And we looked hard at that, and I co-authored a paper in the summer of 2020, which has led me then to where I am today with EnTrade. And the answer to the question was that there's not actually a problem with access to capital. You will know, you're the living and breathing example of that now, right? In terms of what you're doing here at Oxygen Conservation, you've been capitalised to get out there and to restore these ecosystem services and processes on your estate.
Capital is agnostic.
Yeah.
If you will provide it with an exciting rate of return, risk adjusted, the bigger the risk, the more return capital will want. It will invest. You think about people don't see the investment that's in plain sight. The wristwatch you have on your hand, the phone in your pocket, cameras that are recording these podcasts, industrial estates, houses, everything is invested in because it offers a return. The environment sector's never tried. It's never tried to offer a return.
So access to capital is not the problem. The problem is the incoherence of public funding, regulation, and these nascent private incentives on the ground. That was apparent back in 2020.
I'd layer on the almost a sector that didn't want to consider investment as a concept and wasn't prepared to work in a way largely that was professional enough to manage money. Like I love the charitable trust, and they've done so many incredible things. But if they said to you, can we manage your personal money for you and we're going to give you a return, you'd say no. Because if you want to speak to your investment manager, they pick up the phone when you call. They don't say, oh, we don't work on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah. So we're left with a regulatory environment that is not creating the scale of pipeline.
That's a great point.
The liquidity, the clarity, by which I mean it's the clarity about who is required to pay for what over a given period of time, or indeed the certainty. And it's in particular for me, it was then the investment certainty really hangs on how you start to generate the revenues that could provide the basis of a return at an investment scale.
Yeah.
How do you prove the revenue streams that nature can provide? So that's where we began with the EnTrade proposition, which was actually about the ability to create those revenue streams through the sale of the credits to the buyers.
It's interesting that the sort of nutrient neutrality credit market accelerated as fast as it did. And I know it's a bit bumpy now in terms of that. But I often think the ones that are easiest to conceive as nature-based services and products don't get creditized or commoditized as easily. So I think the simplest ones are things like the service that pollinators provide or flood risk management. Someone sees a field full of water. I can see that's reduced flooding. That's of value. But we're nowhere near getting someone to pay for that. Because the insurance companies get it for nothing. We then say, how about this level of phosphate nutrients that's in a river channel that you can't see? You might see the negative outcomes of it. You don't know where it's coming from, but somehow we're going to credit that. There's just this weird dichotomy. And even carbon itself, a global problem that's invisible, but somehow we've managed to put a unit price on it and have more of a structural market in place than any of those other things that are conceptually easier to grasp. It's incredible.
Such a massive step change we need,
Yeah.
and we're not really even at the first stages of that step change. If you go back to the global picture, the Dasgupta review on the economics of biodiversity, his conclusion was that we treat nature like a supermarket without a checkout, and we value the services that we know nature provides to us at zero.
Yep.
So how do you even start to break into that circle and generate those revenues? So that then comes back to, and nutrient neutrality is a great case in point, because we've been working with the regulated drivers such as they are very explicitly for the reasons I described earlier. But in the absence, in the case of nutrient neutrality, of a metric that could be consistently and applied and legally enforced as biodiversity net gain is able to deliver. So it's the absence of the regulatory enablers and the market infrastructures, and importantly and crucially, the governance of these markets that has led us to the place we're in with the planning bill.
We're still almost in the bartering system pre-coinage.
Yeah.
So the natural capital equivalent, we had to put coinage in place because it was really inefficient for people to carry a sheep somewhere and trade it for a bread loaf or whatever. So we had a mechanism. We're still so early in the development of natural capital. The mechanisms for doing it are coming, and we've in our time, like your 7 years at EnTrade and my 4 at OC, we have seen ratings agencies and forward pricing curves. Shout out to Chris, hello. Insurance products and standards and things come, but it's so early still.
Yeah. And part of the mindset shift, coming back to the point about nutrient neutrality, is at the moment we're dealing with mechanisms that are effectively offsetting, right?
Yeah.
They are driving just mechanisms to enable developers to offset for new development. That's not what nature markets are about. Nature markets shouldn't be used as a last resort to avoid harm. These mechanisms are about delivering more efficient use of public and private funding to find and fund the projects and activities that deliver the greatest benefits for the natural environment and optimize the social and economic benefits of those projects and activities. That's a total mindset shift change.
Completely. But is the net, that's where we need to get to. Does your work with Cornwall Council and Arup give an illustration of the type of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, so we've got the 2 pilot markets, and as of the last month, we've just started to work with Cornwall Council to create a new Cornwall nature market. So that's a very happy evolution of the model. Still South West
England. And that's always been an area that even going back to my time in the public sector was forward thinking in terms of how it looked at the environment as a local authority.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they have actually, in Cornwall Council's case, they've benefited from a fund that's been created by central government to enable for local authorities to learn and understand how they can be creating these markets. But their enlightened decision was to recognise that they needed a mechanism that could actually bring, and a high integrity mechanism that could actually bring the two sides of this market together, and that's effectively what we've created in EnTrade. The other evolution has been the ability to set ourselves up properly as an independent company. So Arup came on this journey 4 years ago now. We subcontracted them initially, actually, in a piece of work we did for DEFRA.
I love it when that happens.
Yeah, and there was a very sort of tentative kind of love, sort of slow, steady kind of love-in whilst
Courting.
we realised, courting process, whilst we established the fact they weren't here to take us over or compete and outbid us for the work. Their culture and their model has been perfect for us. As you may know, they're employee owned. Their value set is very aligned to our value set.
Did a market making transaction with Nattergal for carbon credits.
Exactly right. And they're also highly innovative. They're what they bring to EnTrade is the digital expertise. So it's the digital infrastructures and the market platform we've now built to enable us to run the two-sided market. At the heart of the mechanism, it's worth just giving a shout out as well to the University of Exeter here. The University of Exeter have got a team of economists in Ian Bateman's Land and Environmental Economy programme who have worked out...
We should get Ian on the podcast.
Please do. I would say a big shout out to Ian and his team. They work with what's called game theory, which is about how in the real world do people behave in a given market environment. And they've taken a piece of work done by a Nobel Prize winning economist, a chap called Noel Shapley, and they've applied it to the environmental land management agenda, and they've effectively given us a mechanism which they've written an algorithm to codify, which enables us to optimize the cooperation in a market effectively. So you're taking the highest price that somebody is willing to pay for a product, and the highest price that somebody's willing to provide a service at, and the difference between those two prices generates a surplus if the market works as it should. And that surplus is then allocated fairly between those market participants to reflect their contribution to creating that surplus. So what we're doing, therefore, is giving the farmers who bid to offer their projects at cost a discount on their prices, beg your pardon, a bonus payment on their offers, and you're giving the credit buyers a discount on their prices.
Does that perversely disincentivize scale private investment because they'd want the cream? So the analogy I have is in a brokerage system that facilitates that trade, the broker, like the bookmaker, wants to get paid on both sides of the action. So what works there in a greater good sense, does that ultimately be a barrier to those who are moving hundreds of millions and billions in? Because no, that's where we need to get paid.
I think that remains to be seen. How this works up in a scaled up context, I think, remains to be seen. From the point of view of EnTrade as a market operator, we have separated, back to the point about the learnings from the global financial crash, we've separated the prices and payments being traded through our markets from the fees we're charging as a market operator.
Interesting. So how are you paid as the operator?
So we're paid on a fee-for-service basis.
Okay.
We publish those fees transparently in a fee schedule ahead of each market round. So and the importance of that, Rich, is that we're disinterested in the prices of the credits, and we're disinterested in the price and the payments being generated through our markets.
So it's almost which is the right greater good holistic answer to deliver a better environment and people involved in that. It's interesting though, the larger industries that have got there. So everyone jumps to the Patagonias of this world who are like the sustainable, responsible business. It got there after a significant period of profitability, whereas you're getting to good early. So it'll be really interesting to see how that.
And that's been a really, really conscious decision. It's been a commercially constraining decision. I obviously hope and expect that the decision to set ourselves up independently, and we've gone now into joint venture with Arup as a minority shareholder alongside YTL, who are the shareholder of Wessex. So we've been spun out and set up as an independent company. I hope that decision will enable us to scale, but we've very explicitly focused on building a high integrity business model, and we've created a mechanism to govern our market operations in the absence of what government needs to do, which is creating the regulatory environment where we can be properly authorised and where there are legally enforceable metrics and standards that we can be audited against. In the absence of that, we have created what we would say is a high standard in what market integrity should look like.
Have you spoken to Bevis Watts, who's just departing Trade about this?
So Bevis and I have talked on and off for a long time about the regulatory environment for nature recovery.
He's doing some fantastic thinking about what that might look like.
And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with for Bevis in life after Triodos, because I think he will bring that pedigree in finance and in nature recovery and that independence of thought, which we really need to see.
Yeah, I'm excited about that too.
It's been slow and steady inside government, and too slow for my liking. We brought together a coalition of around 300 independent experts back in 2023 to publish what I would still say is the blueprint for how government could be accelerating the design, operation and governance of these markets. We now have the Nature Markets Framework, which was a companion piece to the Green Finance Strategy when that was updated in its last gestation. But it has been very slow to get government to the place where it recognises that these markets will not establish themselves through voluntary action by the private sector alone. So having designed that high integrity model and the high integrity governance that goes with it, we're looking to government now to establish the regulatory drivers and the independent governance that will build the confidence in what we're doing and enable us to scale.
You've got some incredibly precious IP there, because there's often a Joe Rogan segue on the Shoot Room sessions, but he was describing in a podcast with Jimmy Carr, who... you ever seen Jimmy Carr out of character when he's talking long form on a podcast?
No.
The guy's a genius.
Right.
Which I often find the way about comedians, because if you think about how fast they have to process information to do what they do and recall and stuff, legitimate great thinker, like he'd be a philosopher if he wasn't a comedian. And they say there's lots of, in the US right now, a lot of rhetoric about immigration and things. Like, why, instead of stopping people coming here, why don't we export our ways of working? If people like how we live so much, let's help them build the cultures and the economies and the ways that are here in their countries as well. Yeah. And you've got an IP there that's incredibly precious in terms of how these markets should operate as they build up and scale. They're going to be deliverable across the globe. There's so much potential there.
And that's back to where we started in 2020. And I think the opportunity is still there for the UK to leverage its strengths in finance and in regulation to demonstrate what good looks like in how these nature markets can be regulated and governed, and to roll that out. And that becomes a part of the post-Brexit dividend for the UK. I'm glad that government has now just published a call for evidence to look at how the private sector could play a greater part in delivering nature recovery, and I'm hoping that we see very rapid response to that call for evidence from government now in putting in place the regulatory environment that will enable these markets to scale up.
Gabe, you've been incredibly generous with your time. We've covered so much, and it's been a walk down memory lane for both of us. What is the one question I haven't asked you wish I had?
So I tend to look back, and my frame of reference is often on what I've learned, I guess, from the mistakes and the failures in my career as well, I guess, as the things I've done well and I've experienced from others. So I probably would have asked what I'd do differently if I had the benefit of hindsight.
So come on and take us there. What looking back now, what would you do differently?
So, I mean, looking right back to where I started as a callow 21-year-old, graduating with a politics degree, I probably would have done the thing that everything inside me was telling me and screaming at me not to do, which was back in that generation. There was this thing called the milk round, where the big corporates and the big management consultancies would get the graduates and put them through their top drawer graduate training schemes and enable them to progress and develop. And I probably would. I feel like I've done my career backwards. I probably, with the benefit of hindsight, would have started with that pedigree development in the commercial and private sector, and then taken that learning, however far I'd advanced in that environment, and taken that learning and applied it to my environmental passion and interest. I do feel I'm kind of having now to learn many of those skills on the fly. The skills in finance, the language in the private sector is a very different language, and I would have benefited from having started with that fast track development at the start of my career.
Is that the advice you're going to give your boys?
So, funnily enough, I mean, I'm of the view that I should really resist putting any expectations on them through my own lens. But my 16-year-old boy is talking about becoming a lawyer. I think he's heard me talking about the influence of lawyers in the world I inhabit, and the degree to which lawyers and economists seem to run the world, and he sees that as a way of
kind of run our business.
Quite a broad-based way of going into business and acquiring a skill set in deal making, in contracting, in raising finance that he can apply in any walk of life. I mean, he's a keen rugby player. He wants to go into sports science, sports business, potentially with that law degree. But I guess there's something he's subliminally picking up in some of my frustrations about what may have been had I done things differently.
I think on behalf of the whole developing environment sector, we're very glad you took the route you did. So, thank you so much for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich.